Hey, what's up? Welcome back to the channel and to part 2 of my series all about how photographers and videographers can better work together to collaborate on wedding days. In part 1, we specifically talked to photographers, providing 8 practical tips for photographers on how better to work with videographers on wedding days. I will link that video down in the description if you'd like to check that out. This video, part 2, is specifically directed towards videographers and providing 8 practical tips for wedding videographers as they seek to better and more effectively work alongside of photographers on wedding days. Now, a little context on me in case you don't know who I am. My name's Josh. I'm a photographer and filmmaker from West Michigan. I've been in the wedding industry for over a decade now, shooting hundreds of weddings all over the US and internationally. And over that time, I've worked both as a photographer and as a videographer at weddings, working alongside of other videographers and other photographers. And that's where the inspiration for this series began. One of the things I'm super passionate about on wedding days is making sure that the environment, the work environment for photographers and videographers is one of collaboration. It's so easy to just have some tension and frustration between photo and video, and I think that's really unnecessary. At the end of the day, photographers and videographers are there to do the same thing. They've been hired by the wedding couple to document and preserve the priceless once-in-a-lifetime moments that happen on that wedding day. And even though photographers and videographers might approach that process a little bit differently, photo and video should absolutely be working in a collaborative environment to both better capture and document those moments and also deliver those to the client on the back end. So all that being said, let's go ahead and dive into 8 tips for wedding videographers on how to better work alongside of wedding photographers on a wedding day. Oh, and no, this video is not sponsored by MusicBed. They just sent me this awesome t-shirt and I decided to wear it. But if you're looking for music for your wedding films, MusicBed's awesome. Free plug. So tip number 1 is to initiate friendly communication. Now, if you watched part 1, point number 1 for photographers was to establish collaboration early, and I differentiated between communication and collaboration. And we'll for sure get to the collaborative part of things with videographers, but with videographers, I feel like we have to take a step even farther back because videographers have this weird stereotype of being distant, disconnected, uncommunicative, not very friendly, just kind of like right in the peripheral of the wedding day and just not really engaging with people or with what's happening on the wedding day. And we need to change this stereotype. So as a videographer, reach out to the photographer as early on as possible. Introduce yourself and just say like, hey, my name's Josh. I'm the videographer for this wedding. I can't wait to be working alongside of you. I'm so excited for the wedding day. Just establish yourself as a friendly human and break that stereotype that videographers are more distant, disconnected, uncommunicative, not very friendly. You do that by initiating friendly communication as early on as possible. Once you've established friendly communication, now we move on to step number 2, which is to position yourself as a collaborator with the photographer. Another very common stereotype that videographers often run into is that videographers are oftentimes in the way, that they position tripods in really awkward positions, that they move in front of the photographer and their gimbals and all that kind of get in the way of everything. And so I find it super effective to reach out to the photographer very early on, initiate that friendly communication and just be like, hey, I'm a friendly, fun human. I'm excited to work with you, but then also position yourself as a collaborator. I'll very specifically call out those stereotypes and just be like, hey, listen, I'm not going to position a tripod right in the center of the aisle when people are walking up and down the aisle. I'm going to try to keep long lenses and stuff out of view so things are really aesthetically beautiful. I want to work alongside of you to make sure that all of our angles and perspectives and compositions are as beautiful as possible so we can do the best job for our couples, but also just have a really fun time creating it in the process. All of this just positions you as a collaborator, somebody who wants to come alongside of a photographer to work together as a team to accomplish a unified goal. And that goal is to create the best experience possible for your clients, document all of those memories in the best way possible, and ultimately deliver the best product to the client. So once you've initiated that friendly communication and positioned yourself as a collaborator, then it's time to make sure that you communicate the needs that you have as a videographer. The art forms of videography and photography are very similar, but there are also some pretty stark differences, and making sure that you can do your job effectively is paramount in being able to deliver what the client is expecting you to deliver. A few of the major needs that videographers have that photographers don't is number 1, the need to capture movement and action over the course of time. Photographers are experts at finding and capturing subtle moments that happen, but videographers seem to capture multiple moments or action movement over the course of time and space, and that just takes some extra time. And so as a videographer, communicate that need for movement, communicate that need for time to capture that movement. Another need that videographers have is the need to capture audio. And depending on how you're capturing this, you might need to establish some specific cues for the photographer to notice of when you need them to just kind of reduce their noise so that you can capture some specific audio that's happening. And then one more need that really shouldn't have to be communicated, but unfortunately sometimes does, is that as a videographer, you need to be included in capturing all the critical moments of the day. I cannot tell you how many times as a videographer I've had a photographer go off to capture details, to capture specific getting ready moments, or even to capture portraits without including me, without informing me on what was going on. Even though we both had the timeline, they just took the couple off to go do something on their own, didn't let me know, and so I missed all of those moments. And so just communicate to the photographer, hey, I need to be included on some of these critical moments, and communicate the needs that you have for capturing motion, capturing movement, and capturing audio. Again, you've already positioned yourself as a collaborator, you're working on this together, and you can provide solutions to work around and through their workflows, but make sure you still communicate the needs that you have as a videographer, because ultimately you've been hired by the couple to do a specific job, and you need to ensure that you have the ability to actually enact that job so you can deliver the best work possible to the client. The fourth tip here is to establish posing protocols with the photographer. Now, usually I give deference to the photographer and make sure that they kind of have the priority over specific poses and all that, but I also communicate that I do have a desire to direct some specific shots, and especially because I have a need for motion and audio, there might be a few moments where I need to step in and start directing things. Establishing posing protocols at the beginning or well before the wedding day even happens ensures that you will be able to kind of hand that process back and forth between photo and video so that each of you can capture the elements that you need to. Now, obviously, you don't want this to be distracting to the couple, and I mentioned in part 1 as a photographer how I usually handle this, but however you decide to set that up, make sure that you've established posing protocols so that when you need to direct something, when you need to start vocalizing specific needs, you're able to do so and the photographer is ready for you to do that. Now, before we move on to the next tip, I want to pause just for a second and talk to you about the free guidebook that I've created as a companion to this video series. I have called it the Collaboration Handbook for obvious reasons, and it's all about photography and videography workflows and how each of us can work better with the other on wedding days. I dive into specifics about photography workflows, videography workflows, how they're different, how we can all work together. I provide practical tips and tricks on how each party can work better with the other, and I provide 2 pages of questions that photographers and videographers can ask each other to help make the workflow environment on a wedding day even better. Like I said, this is a free download, so click the link in the description to check that out, and hopefully that will help you as you approach shooting weddings. All right, let's go ahead and move on to tip number 5, and that is to, as a videographer, make sure that you are anticipating movement before it happens. Like I've already mentioned, photography is all about the art of capturing little moments as they happen, little snapshots in time, but videography has to capture movement as it unfolds through the course of time. And as a videographer, if you're always trying to create movement in every single pose, if you're always trying to direct movement, that can just take a lot of extra time. And so the art of videography on wedding days is making sure that you anticipate movement before it happens so you can position yourself, your cameras, and your composition to capture that movement as it unfolds naturally. This means listening to what the photographer is doing as they're directing the couple and anticipating where the couple's going to move throughout the scene, but then also just reading subtle cues from the couple, from other guests, from people at the wedding who might be doing some things that would be fantastic to capture on video. Make sure to anticipate that movement and get ahead of it so you can capture motion without being distracting and having to direct every single thing. Anticipating movement allows you to capture a lot more natural motion without having to always step in, but there are some times when you do need to step in, and that leads us to point number 6, which is to not be afraid to take charge when you need to. Like I've already said multiple times in this video, both photographers and videographers have huge responsibilities of documenting and preserving moments and memories for this couple on the wedding day. And so as a wedding videographer, if there's a moment where you need to speak up, you need to make something happen, there's a certain position or an angle that you really need to capture to better your wedding film, don't be afraid to take charge. Don't be afraid to speak up and get the shot that you need for your film. Now, obviously, do this with tact. You don't want to be obnoxious and disrupt the entire experience that the couple is having on the wedding day, because ultimately, that's way more important than even the moments that you're capturing is the experience the couple's having. But when you see a moment, when you see something happen that you need to capture, don't be afraid to take charge, to speak up, to make sure that you're able to capture and document that moment effectively. That leads us to tip number 7, which is to be conscious about your framing and composition and work with the photographer to make sure you're capturing similar angles at the same time. Back to stereotypes of videographers, one of the things I oftentimes hear about videographers, and I've definitely been guilty of this myself, is that videographers often move around a lot because we're trying to capture motion, and that movement can oftentimes get in front of or disrupt what the photographer is trying to accomplish with their cameras. And so my tip here is to be super conscious of your composition, your framing, and your focal lengths. Ask the photographer what focal length they're shooting on, if they're shooting wider shots or tighter shots, and try to mirror what the photographer is doing so that you don't get in each other's way. Now, obviously, back to the previous point, don't be afraid to speak up if you need to capture a specific tight shot or a wide shot, or you haven't got the shot you need. Make sure you speak up when you do that. But the more you can mirror each other and capture the same angles at the same time, number one, the more cohesive both of your deliverables are going to be. But then two, you're also not getting in each other's way. You're not disrupting workflows. You're all able to do the same things at similar times. The entire day just goes so much more smoothly. And that leads us with our 8th and final tip, and that is to communicate your ins and outs. Now, this tip is kind of fun because it makes the wedding filming experience feel a little bit more like a movie set. And here's what I mean by that. When you're filming a wedding, be actively communicating with the photographer about when you're shooting and when you are not shooting. Generally speaking, whenever a photographer is taking a photograph, you kind of know what they're doing. They pick up their camera, they put it up to their eye, or they kind of hold it out to watch the LCD, and you can see them clicking away at the camera. But with videographers, we're oftentimes holding our cameras in very similar positions all the time, and people don't know when we're filming, reviewing footage, or simply just standing by waiting for the next scene to happen. Additionally, because videographers also need to capture movement, and that takes a little bit more time than photographers might take, the photographer might not know when you've finished unless you tell them. And so whenever I'm filming weddings, I make sure to communicate my ins and especially my outs to the photographer that I'm working alongside of. If I have to punch in to grab a quick shot, I'll let them know that. And then as soon as I'm out of the frame, the camera's off and I'm not recording anymore, I will let them know so that they know, number one, they can keep talking again if I was trying to capture audio, or they can start directing the client again, or however that works. I make sure to communicate ins and outs just like a director would by saying action and cut on a movie set. Now, obviously, you have to do this discreetly. You don't want to disrupt the entire client's experience just because you're shouting action cut all the time. This is not a photo shoot. This is not a movie scene. This is a wedding that you're trying to document, but making sure that you're in communication, even if it's nonverbal, with the photographer to let them know, hey, this is an important moment. I'm capturing this right now, and then now I'm done, will go a really, really long way in making sure that entire workflow is a lot more collaborative. There's less stress and less cameras getting in front of each other because each of you knows what the other is doing. Those are my 8 tips for videographers on how to work better with photographers on wedding days. If you found this video helpful, please let me know down in the comments. That would mean the world to me. If you haven't already checked out part 1, I will link that down below so you can do that as well. And if you haven't downloaded my free collaboration handbook, which dives into a lot more detail about all of these things, please do that with the link in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers.